the Baen Free Radio Hour.
Today on the Baen Free Radio Hour, Sean Hazlett speaks with Baen authors DJ Butler and M.A. Rothman about their latest collaboration in the Time Trials series, Ice Trials. And we continue to bring you the amazing Wen Spencer's Tinker with Part 81.
Welcome to the Baen Free Radio podcast, Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. Good to see you, Dave Butler, I'm with, and also Michael Rothman. Welcome, gentlemen.
Howdy, howdy.
Okay, let's just start out for if someone just fell off a turnip truck. Dave and Mike, just briefly provide quick your backgrounds and why you decided to collaborate on this book.
I guess I can start. So brief background, I mostly write science fiction thrillers. My background is in science. And I had dabbled in what at the time certainly was a new genre called lit RPG. And I wasn't thinking to write a lit RPG in as much as in the traditional sense, but I've known Dave for years, and I like and Dave will give his background, but between mixing my background and his, I thought it would be an interesting take on an adventure, kind of an epic adventure that we could construct that. Many would argue fall under the umbrella of lit RPG, but brings real science, brings real history, etc. So that's why I initially approached Dave about the possibility of doing something together, and we had that discussion, and here we are.
Yeah, Mike is sort of a Michael Crichton figure. That's limiting to Mike because he's written things that are fantasy, but typically he's somewhere on the sort of techno thriller, near future science fiction, maybe straight thriller kind of axis. I think fair to say most of your books. Yeah. Most of what I have written is fantasy, and I like playing with language and culture and history. In some of the ways that Mike likes playing with science. And I was pretty skeptical about lit RPG, and we negotiated exactly how lit RPG these books would be. So if what you love is pages of stat blocks for the character progressing, you will not find those. We're like a lit RPG light. The basic story, it's sort of Stargate meets Quantum Leap meets Indiana Jones. It's about an archaeological team on a private kind of off-grid dig in Egypt that finds some extraordinary, clearly very old, undecipherable hieroglyphs, and they go and they recruit to one of the world's great leaders of readers of ancient Egyptian, who is retired in disgust from academia and is running a carpentry shop in New Haven, and needs the money. So they bring him out hey, just come read these things and go home. And to his astonishment, he finds that some of the unreadable hieroglyphs are in fact in a personal hieroglyphic language he himself invented as a child. And then the site takes them all back in time. And so the story is about this archaeological dig team that is, we basically get 6 team members after some initial sorting. So there's a young Egyptian digger, there's a Sikh commando kind of head of security, there's an Australian woman who's a cultural anthropologist, there's the French kind of dilettante who's funding the whole thing. a German archaeologist, and then there's Marty Chang, not Chang, Marty Cohen. Chang is his maternal grandfather's name. Kung Fu Cohen, martial artist, archaeologist, scholar of ancient languages, who's our basically our main character. We get all of their points of view over time. But Marty is, I think it's fair to say, the hero, and he's so the lit RPG is, well, so the setup is they go jumping through time and they're cast in the role of like defenders of humanity. So this is not a course they chose, but when they're on the course, they're on this course and they encounter human beings being oppressed by whatever it is, various kinds of things that look like aliens or ghouls or Egyptian gods. They intervene on behalf of the humans. The lit RPG aspect, by book 2, they basically, it's all in the open. They figure out over the course of book 1 that improbably they seem to have become D&D characters. So each of them has a character class, which we stayed, I don't know, 80 or 90% faithful to the second edition D&D rules. Maybe not that much. Francois is a little, but maybe basically faithful with some kind
any like unearthed arcana character classes that you brought
like
in,
the
like
cavalier or the
barbarians
thief
and
acrobat.
cavalier.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
well. The thing is we were sort of crypto D&D because none of them are gamers in the D&D sense, so they don't recognize it as D&D, but they recognize that they've developed these capabilities that, and it was always kind of the goal. Anyone reading this, we wanted to make this as broad of an audience as possible, so a lit RPG reader would know exactly what's going on. Yeah, they'd read it. We wouldn't have had to have told them. They knew what they were seeing. But for, let's say, a thriller reader, a normal reader of thrillers or fantasy that isn't a D&D player, they would read it on face value and recognize it for the elements that we talked about. So the folks who care about D&D or RPGs of any kind or another have something to appreciate, which doesn't necessarily throw off the folks who aren't into that stuff at all. So we try to walk that fine line.
Yeah. I don't know if we have a reader who's completely not a gamer, what they think about, hey, the characters solve a puzzle or defeat an enemy. Glowing spheres of light rise up from the puzzle or the enemy to enter their bodies. They learn new skills. I don't know what they think about that. Maybe they, maybe.
I mean, every video game's like that to some extent, right? So,
but believe it or not, out there among the normies, there are people who don't play video games either. So, yeah, but maybe they just assume the characters are in a simulation, which may, after all, be true. We don't know that. Maybe that's why they have D&D classes. So that's kind of the basic setup and the story. So
did you actually make character sheets for these guys, like intelligence scores and strength?
No, but we did
wisdom?
map out the development of special abilities.
Right.
Okay.
So we did say, okay, at this point, surgeon
for our own use, as we were writing it. Yeah.
Of course.
Right.
Of course. Yeah.
This is where Marty's going to also begin to understand the speech of animals and birds because he is a monk.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we definitely had mapped out a progression. Yeah, because one of the I learned only today, I guess, progression fantasy is a thing. So which this is starting to feel somewhat like it in as much as it's a genre that shows a character developing, like D&D, where you go up in levels, you gain some skills. So it's sort of what is happening here. And so we had mapped out, okay, at some point in time, they're going to hit level 7. We never really talk about it to a great extent in the book, but when we're writing it, going, all right, we know this guy is going to have to pick up this skill and realize it none of them being gamers, they're gonna have to experience it. So they're not gonna identify it as, oh, I just picked up the ability to talk to birds. You know, it's like you just suddenly realized that you understood what that bird said. So
Okay, so as you're mapping this out, kind of using that as a loose guideline, but obviously you don't have character sheets in the book. You don't have
Oh.
grids and things like that, which is
Also,
I
we're
would
cheating
think is
though, because
probably a good thing.
we're not sticking entirely to the character classes. We're roughly using second edition or player, yeah, AD&D, the hardback edition. And in particular, we're sticking pretty closely to the spell lists there.
Mhm.
But we're also like, it seems like one of the things the ranger ought to get is some enhanced senses. Let's give Sir John some enhanced senses. Also, in AD&D, the bard is ridiculous. I don't know if you're familiar with AD&D, but you have to go be a thief for a while, and then be a fighter for a while, and then you become a bard. So, like in the world of AD&D, any random minstrel on the road is guaranteed to be a badass and also a pickpocket, right? Which is like, really? Like, no one just picks up a loot and goes. So he's a
I,
little fudged.
I mean, that's also why we didn't explicitly call anything out within the book as D&D or have any revelations such as that. So it gave it didn't bind us to anyone
Mhm.
calling us out. Hey, at level 7, you don't get that. It's like, nah, I don't want to deal with that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be kind of annoying.
I don't want to surprise you, but just as in among the normies, there are some non-gamers. Among the sci-fi fantasy readers, there's some very, very committed gamers.
yes.
Any
So,
experiences with said gamers in either of your prior works?
I've had people, yes, I've had people want to pick nits about things. For sure, it happens. The thing is, when you undertake the endeavor of writing a novel-length work, okay,
Mhm.
it's going to have mistakes. It's going to have all kinds of mistakes. It's going to have spelling mistakes. You're going to go, oh, I attributed the dialogue line to the wrong person. Dang, I don't think we've talked about Sir John's turban at all, and we're like 2 books in. Okay, like there are mistakes. I'm not sure that's true, but it occurred to me there tonight. I was like, man, now I don't even know. So, uh, you just have to. You put the book out. It's an act of courage. You know what? Someone they're going to be nits to pick. That happens.
And so far so good. I mean, at least certainly. I mean, feedback on book 2 is only just now rolling in, but on book 1 it's been fairly well received. So nothing to complain about. I don't think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you both have different sets of skills. How did you collaborate to combine them in kind of this series?
Mike wrote the chip design segments, and I did the accounting.
I mean, the thing is when we worked through the outline, we did outline it pretty extensively before we even started, just so we knew, because we kind of broke it down along storylines and chapters and whatnot. So we needed to know where the transition points were, what was actually going to happen by the time Dave starts on this particular chapter, or I mean, certain things needed to be done so that it made sense and it made the editing, smoothing out, and everything else not a torture test. So, so and that actually worked out pretty well. Obviously, I was all over the science, and Dave was all over the language, and and historical artifacts and stuff like that. And we kind of met in the middle on most of the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, it's mostly planned out in the outline. I think it's exactly right. So we're like, hey, if you're gonna write a book the way we do, which is like we each write half the chapters, but not necessarily the first and the second half. In fact, not the first and the second half, like the teeth of 2 combs that are pushed together. You have to plan it out in advance. So you spend a fair amount of time talking through and be like, oh, here would be a cool idea. What about this? What about this? I mean, one of the things that happened with this book is we ended up book one telling the readers that the characters had arrived in India. And we got together at book two, and Mike's like, I don't want to be in India. I want to be in Atlantis, and it should be in the Caribbean. And I'm like, we said India. He's like, yep, they were wrong. The characters were wrong.
And you write that in on chapter one. You go, I mean, you basically lead in where you ended on book one, and then you have a revelation. It's like all these things that made you think what you thought at the end of book one. It's like, well, hold on.
Yep.
Maybe I was wrong.
Yep. So you plan all that out, and you go, hey, here would be a cool historical idea. So in the second book, so in the first book, one of the ideas we played with was the idea of dating when they were in time by the precession of the equinoxes.
Mm-hmm.
Mike also worked in some cosmological ideas, which I'm going to forget how to say it. Something brain
The
cosmology.
yeah,
Brain
cosmology. Yeah,
but not like this brain BRA.
BRANE.
Like
Yeah.
M dash brain theory, basically, like the bulk.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the idea that so brain cosmology really is about the multiverse. You have many different universes, and they're essentially laying kind of flat against each other, and there may be only like atoms with separation between these layers that we think of as our universe. So, there's elements of that, and and anyone who's read book one will remember there were a couple of key scenes that have to do with something called the administrator, and it's been part of the story from the very get-go. And more and more we're introducing. I mean, these people. If you think about it this way, this is a group. This is a team that's a modern day team. You and I and Dave and wherever, whoever are working on a dig. You're not expecting to go suddenly find yourself in like ancient Egypt. You're not expecting, weird stuff to happen. So, and no one's telling you that that's actually what happened. So you're on an adventure of discovery. It's like, well, what just happened? I don't know. And the reader, is led on a quest to figure out what in the world just happened. I don't know. So, and then you have these little vignettes of this administrator, which gives the reader the characters don't know anything about this administrator, but they're starting to get inklings of things, and the reader is starting to get inklings of things. And so there's much more to the story that's going on in background, and you more of that unfolds in book two, and so on.
Yeah. So not only is this a book series which really pushes a diversity agenda, we got a bunch of really diverse characters. It also pushes climate change, because in book two, the characters come to the Younger Dryas period, and they encounter a group of humans who are being rapidly flooded out of their home, which is actually a palace that's mysteriously big and advanced for the small human population that lives there, and seems to have subterranean levels inhabited by ghouls. And so we've got kind of climate change ideas going on, some sort of Graham Hancockian historical questions, right? We also have
a little time machine with the Morlocks underground ish, maybe.
Yes, but the Morlocks turn out
maybe they're not advanced. Yeah,
turn out to be
much more
great,
advanced,
basically. So we play with some anthropology ideas, with the idea of the dying and rising year king of James George Fraser's Golden Bough. So one of the sort of fun plots is Sir John, and it's an old idea, and in his book, Fraser arguably exaggerated how widespread this was, but it was a very influential idea. It still has influence. that there is at a certain archaic stratum of culture a behavior where the king is the one who's supposed to guarantee prosperity, good weather, rain, all that stuff. And when he fails, his magic is going. So you take him into the sacred place and give him a spear and leave him there to defend himself against all comers. And whoever comes and kills him becomes the new king. And so Sir John, like in chapter 2, inadvertently kills the king of these people. He wanders into where the guy is in the sacred forest, and the guy kills him, thinking he's an attacker, right? The guy tries to kill him. Sir John makes short work of him. So that was kind of a fun plot to put this unwilling modern into kind of this sacred year king role with a machinating queen who seems to have her own interests at heart.
Their own agenda.
Yeah. Just as examples of some of the sorts of, but there's lots of like little ideas. In book one of the characters, Francois, is very inventive. He's a thinker, and he's kind of a tinkerer. Like he likes to make and experiment. And in book one, he makes bombs. So by the end of book one, Kung Fu Cohen, the warlord, is leading several hundred people across the North African desert to go try and find Narmer, the first Egyptian king, in a caravan loaded with bombs, just in case.
Just in case.
Just in
As
case.
one does. Right.
It's got a little. So for those readers who may be listening to this, listeners who are 1632 fans, Francois, that character, Francois Garnier, kind of scratches that itch a little bit. He's the guy who's always trying to like build a device, right? In the second book, he's trying to convince people that their atlatls are not nearly as good as bows, and he's teaching them how to use bows. He's trying to advance their projectile weaponry. So there's lots of like, there's some big kind of science and anthropology ideas. There's lots of little ones also, kind of throughout. But for me, the fun thing is the characters. I thought one thing was great about this book is the way the characters all had various kinds of evolutions happen to them. So, for example, Marty and Luana have kind of had sexual tension from book one. Tony wanted us to make it more than sexual tension. She felt strongly they should, I think the phrase was, get it on. They did not get it on. In fact, they have not explicitly gotten it on, even by the end of book two. I'm not sure they will explicitly get it on at any point. It feels like more of a PG book. But their relationship advances. I have many favorite scenes in this book. One of them is the one where they're kind of fighting because she had this kind of other guy paying attention to her, and it made Marty feel uncomfortable. And after they've defeated these cannibals in Brazil, they're kind of shouting at each other until they sort of work it out.
And the other thing, and this actually brings into kind of like the setting of the, so we obviously have the characters themselves, and they all each have their own arcs and their own evolution, like Dave said. But, it's like, another character really out there is kind of like the environment, because they're in an environment that is in flux. I mean, imagine you're sitting at the end of the ice age. Things are changing drastically, but people oftentimes forget that there were megafauna still around at the time. Imagine a 12-foot tall sloth. That. Not cute and cuddly. I mean, there's dangers out there that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Saber-toothed tigers were still in it, around there. They quickly start to realize that, the world isn't exactly the way they remember it. And so they're having to deal with the ramifications of a different time, and natural fauna that just doesn't exist in today's day and age. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the fun another of the fun kind of the giant sloths and things. Another one of the fun bits was we worked the Piri Reis map into this,
Mhm.
which is really famous if you're kind of in. This is way,
history one.
yeah. This is way prior to Graham Hancock. I think the guy's name is Charles Hapgood, maybe. Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings. So the Piri Reis map was made circa the year 1400 by a guy who was a sailor his whole life, a Turkish guy, um, and ended up as an admiral. And it seems like I think he gave the gift to the Ottoman Turk, the Ottoman Sultan, and then maybe was summoned back to duty as the admiral of the Ottoman Navy or something. But even as a boy, the Ottoman had corsairs. They were famous pirates, and he'd sailed with his uncle who was a pirate. And he put together this map, which he claimed was from existing sources, and we don't know those sources.
Mhm.
Um, but the map looks kind of funny because it looks like Hispaniola is oriented the wrong way and like 5 times too large. Um, and the coasts of North and South America seems to be basically accurate, except then in South America, there's no Straits of Magellan. The coastline just curves out, and it seems to show. Now, not everyone thinks this is what it's showing, but it seems to show the ice-free coast of Antarctica. And so people now again, some people think this is just a bad map, like many old maps were bad. Um, and they were when they ran out, they just made up stuff, right? Uh, but Charles Hapgood and others have thought that another possibility was that Piri Reis was working with some very old maps, or really probably copies of
Mhm.
very old maps, dating back to a time when Antarctica was ice free, right?
Or potentially that the sea levels were so different, going back to the time frame of when this book is set, where you have why is Hispaniola that much bigger? Well,
Uh,
the water was much lower because you had much wider ice flows. There was this merger between South America and into the Antarctic, and so there's a lot of speculation around that map and how to best interpret it. But
yeah.
we've certainly taken an interpretation of it. So yeah,
We stuck it in the book
yeah,
because it's cool.
yeah,
That's kind of what the series is like. Hey, what is some stuff that's cool? Archaeologists fighting evil. That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Hey, D&D, that's cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Piri Reis map. That's cool, right? This is sort of the series of cool stuff being inserted. Making your own bombs. That's pretty cool. It's not. Don't do it. But
But
Yes,
if
we don't advocate that at home.
no, but it's the kind of thing where you want to look up and you want to be able to read stuff and then go look it up and go, wait a minute, they didn't make that up. That there is such a thing,
Yeah.
and then you just go down into a black hole of just Google searches, and the goal being you're not sure what's real, what's not real in the book, and that's okay. That's kind of the intent.
Yeah, that's such a great line. That's exactly the line I try to walk up to in The Witchy War too, is to get to like people get to the point where they like read a thing and they're like, I don't know if that's really a thing Andrew Jackson did, or did he only do it in this book?
Yeah,
That sounds like it might be real, right?
yeah,
That's exactly where I want the reader to be.
yeah.
And how often do you do that? Where you
All the
kind
time.
of
Yeah.
so like you literally take something that's almost true and then you're like, okay, it's true in the book, or is it
Well, but put it
might
this
be
way:
true?
but most of the things that we assert as fact by the characters probably are.
Mhm.
But we may take it a couple steps further, and improvise with how it was used or how it was interpreted, and so they certainly talk about the map, and they talk about an interpretation of it. Does everyone agree with an interpretation? Some do, some don't. It's okay.
Yeah.
When you kind of went through this book, what would you say are some of the salient themes?
Well, that's interesting. Feels to me like the themes tend to get sort of born. They're expressed in plots, right? You don't have the characters standing around saying the themes. You have things happen, and like the themes are defined by what characters are trying to do and their success or failure. So, I mean, I think one of the themes that kind of came through is the the difficulty of fatherhood, and nobody's actually a father in this book with a. I think none of them actually have children at all, but none of them certainly have children there. But the youngest member of the group, one and arguably maybe two of the older characters, certainly Francois, maybe to some extent also Marty, sort of try and take young Kareem under their wing. Kareem's uncle, Kareem is a young digger from Cairo. He's had kind of a rough urban upbringing. He's the kind of kid who's occasionally stolen a motorcycle or, carton of cigarettes or whatever, right? And he's got a pretty good job working on this archaeological dig, and then suddenly he's 5,000 years in the past, and his uncle is dead, killed by a Seth-headed monster, and just what the hell, right? And so,
And this kid is suddenly finding himself with some skills that are intriguing him.
Yeah, because he is like a rogue assassin kind of character class. Okay. And so it starts in book one with him getting pretty jazzed, coming to really like killing monsters. Right. Now, a lot of good reasons. They killed his uncle. So it feels he's getting revenge, right? For Abdullah. And he's also saving the party. But in book two, as Francois is trying to take him under his wing, he sees this coming. He's trying to stop him. He's saying, "This is you're going too far. You can't just kill everybody." And then that counseling basically fails, right? And Kareem in the last scenes of the book kills a lot of pretty innocent characters. Maybe it's not PG after all.
Yeah.
It's not PG. It's got a lot of violence.
And
And
a little murder hobo, but yeah.
Yeah. So like one theme, right? And I don't think we ever even say the word father, but like one theme in there is like the difficulty of counseling a young human and the sort of hell of the fact that you can only expose a young human to wisdom. You cannot make a young human decide wisely, right? The young human is still going to do what she or he wants to do. And that's painful if you've been the one trying to counsel and share and lead, and then like he goes and kills friends, right?
I mean that touches on like the theme of kind of growing a person or even a team, levels of responsibility. Like Kareem is young and unguided. I mean he's a teenager, but still young and unguided, and they're trying to work that. But even I mean you have all sorts of characters throughout the team who are like put in situations that they didn't sign up for, like Surjan being. So, he got attacked by some random dude in some woods and ended up killing him, and now he's suddenly become the king. And it's like, I didn't ask for this. I signed up for a security guard position. What's going on here?
Yeah, I don't want that femme fatale.
Yeah, right. And I've got some woman who I know wants to stick something in my back. So it's like so you see these evolutions of characters, and also the team itself. They kind of depend on each other fulfilling certain roles. So so you see, it's like even though each on the individual basis are having their own struggles, but you see the team dynamics have to evolve, and they become. I mean, I would certainly say that from book one to book two, the team dynamics have grown stronger, with a couple of hiccups, certainly with the murder hobo, but overall the team dynamics have grown stronger. So it's kind of an evolution both at the individual and at the team level.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the themes in book 1 was sort of the struggle for who was gonna lead, right?
Mhm.
And, so it's sort of basically sorted out, by the end of book 1. But, I mean, one of the things that was left unsorted, our main point of view character, Marty, is his character class is monk, so he can do things like fall great distances as long as he's close to a wall, and he's a better and better martial artist all the time, and he can hear the speech of animals, and I think he also gets stealth abilities, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Hide in shadows, that kind of thing.
yeah, I think at some point he gets healing or spells or something. We write
Yeah,
next
a
book.
little bit.
Yeah. Uh, so that's a different kind of a. It's interesting. Tony fought us on this too, right? I think Tony wanted a real kind of. I'm going to use some gross characterizations, but like a red meat chewing American male, uh, which is fine. I am a red meat chewing American male, right? I like it's fine. But we wrote a character who was more worried to try and stay restrained as well as to be effective and not assert himself too much. And so, the book 1, we saw how that plays out in the dynamic of sort of leadership struggle. Book 2, we saw kind of how it played out in the relationship struggle, right? And
Mhm.
so being that character in Marty's life might be easier if he was a red meat chewing. He just asserted himself over everybody, right? But he doesn't. Um, Another one of the really each of the characters has some kind of development, but there's like a spiritual element to this too. There's a quest. So Gunther, really right at the very beginning of this book, at the moment when they transition from book 1 to book 2, starts hearing voices, right? And this is sort of the classic. Um, Well, I don't know. It's the dilemma of the 21st century rational scientist who is thrust into the experience of Abraham and suddenly hears a voice in his head saying, "Get up and do this." Right? What do you do? Because all of your training tells you you're probably having an episode.
Yeah, that's a paranoid schizophrenic. That's
That's
what
right.
like
You
modern
you've
Trinity.
had a
But
break with reality.
are the voices they hearing? Are they just in their heads, or they're coming from somewhere
Well,
else?
That's
well, that's the interesting thing because obviously we're not going to give away anything in this talk,
Mhm.
but through the book, the reader will experience some of those voices because obviously the character, Gunther in this case is experiencing these voices, but in the very few vignettes that we have from that elusive unknown character, the administrator is having kind of a conniption fit going, where did that voice come from? Track it. It didn't come from us. Where did it come from? We don't know. So it's like, what does that mean?
yeah,
We don't explain it purposefully,
yeah,
but we have a character in book that is hearing voices. We have another character who the reader is led to believe is essentially the puppet master of this entire, shindig, going, what the heck just happened? you know, uh, what's going on? So another mystery has opened.
yeah. So one question is, if you're Abraham, right? One question is, this is the Akeda, right? What happens when you say okay and you go obey the voice,
Hmm.
right?
Mhm.
That's a very important moment of truth.
Well,
And
and how do you know? How do you know the voice that says it's God is really God?
right. So
Right? How do you know? Like, how do you prove it? It's
yeah. So it's an adventure story, and I think it's pretty funny. I think we write pretty funny. The characters are witty, and it's not that they squabble all the time, but as good friends who know each other do, there's a fair amount of banter, you know. Um, but yeah, but there's a lot going on too. There's a lot going on in the stories.
And it's not a safe world. So there is that sort of Damocles is hanging over their head the entire time, going, yeah, well, we don't know what's happening tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
now, Michael, for you, some of the aspects of the story, like communicating with animals and um, some of the abilities that characters have. How do you make attempts to reconcile them with science, or do you see them as completely distinct? For that, not
That's
personally, but in terms of the book, right?
yeah. So this is one of those things where, because knowing Dave was primarily a fantasy genre writer, and me being the more, I won't call it straight laced, but the non fantasy guy, not, but still obviously fiction. Um, you know, the approach that I took was, you know, I put myself in a situation where I'm like, if I suddenly, in a moment of panic or whatever, touch someone and I see a flash of light, emanate from my hand, I freak out. I go, I pull back. I go, what was that? But suddenly, that burn that the guy had on his arm, there's this, let's say a handprint of area that is no longer burned. How do I interpret that as a normal day in the life modern human going, what just happened? I don't know. But what we're seeing, the gamers are going to go, he's a healer. So you don't necessarily attempt to explain it using science, because kind of some of the things that happen, you toss the rule book out, on the science, but you want to make it like for instance, that we can't use in this book, some of the things that would be very typical of a fantasy novel, epic fantasy, where, if you have a wizard, he's going to make these hand gestures and some arcana will spew out of his mouth. Where none of these guys are going to have any of that, because where would they have learned that? Where would they have picked that up? None of that makes any sense whatsoever for this book. It becomes, you learn by accident. There's no rule book, there's no monster manual or player's handbook for them to read. They're learning by trial and error. And how do you learn by trial and error? Well, okay, let me put myself in that situation. If something weird just happened, or I heard a bird tweeting, but I for some reason, I heard the tweet, but I also understood that it was hungry and looking for something to eat. I'm like, did I imagine that, or did that really happen? Yeah, and you slowly start to figure out that, oh, crap, I think I understand what that thing said, or tweeted at me. So yeah, so you try to make it, I mean, some things are not realistic, but you try to make it as natural, even though it's a bizarre situation, you try to make it as natural of an approach as possible. If you encounter something that is unbelievable, how would you react? Well, that's how our characters have to react. And then at some point in time, you have to just deal with the fantastic and go, okay, I'm accepting that if I concentrate really hard and hold on to somebody, maybe I can somehow heal them, and you start to experience that more, and you start to learn about how to use it, those skills, and that's a lot of the struggle you see in book one, and it continues in book two, because book two, even the characters are still advancing, so they're encountering new skills that they don't even know that they have, maybe, but they discover that they have, by accident, almost always.
Yep.
Now, when you're collaborating and kind of writing the characters, do you have certain characters that each of you write individually, and then, or do you kind of both work on the same characters and
I think we all
go
work
through different
on
scenes?
we yeah. There's no one character that I work on exclusively. We literally did break it up into chapters so that it was kind of random. So we just had to at least follow the gist of, I mean, we'd already kind of plotted out, what's the personality like for each character. So we had an idea of certainly behavior wise and skill sets and everything else. But no, we broke it down into chapters so that, we would each write it, and then inevitably we would both go through heavy edits once everything was done, just so we can smooth out the language, because his language will be a little bit different than mine. If I find Dave suddenly made our healer do magic things with his hands, I'm like, all right, let's cut that out. We won't do that. Um,
I
you
had
know,
one in book one. You didn't like that.
yeah. But we normalize the language so that I defy people to try to figure out who wrote which chapter. It's probably going to be very hard.
Yeah. As I recall, I think in both books, we sort of started as kind of alternating chunks. And then at some point fairly early on, Mike went through and just assigned the rest of the chapters. And so like, there it was. I had my assignment.
Yeah.
And there, each book has what, 40 chapters and like, or give or take one or two.
Yeah.
So, we,
And I don't think we had any length that was probably more than like 4 contiguous chapters individually. So it was always back and forth. So it it made it easier to recognize during the editing process whether or not we had a change in voice for a certain character. We need, okay, let me fix that. Because if you read, let's say one of my chapters or 10 of my chapters in a row, and then you might suddenly hit this startling change in voice for the next chapters. So it just seemed easier to kind of break it up more and and then alternate back and forth.
yeah, 100%.
Now, what's next for these characters? Is the second book the end, or just the
Oh no, we from the beginning have had it's kind of like we knew there was going to be a third book no matter what. If the third book is the last one, that remains to be seen. We have it plotted, so third book could be. I think I said at one Bane Road show that we were going to do this as a trilogy, and one of the first trilogies that's actually 3 books in Bane. So that I think I did state that at one of the road shows. So I think we're going to try to do that. But
So
never
you're
say
saying
never.
there's a chance it's a 5-book trilogy, basically.
I'm definitely saying that if Tony Weisskopf came and offered us lots of money, we would talk about it.
I mean, that's usually how these Bane trilogies go, right? They end up being 5 books.
That was my introduction to Larry Correia. He was on a panel at LTUE, and I was watching him. It's like 5 women and Larry on a panel talking about writer stuff. And the question was asked, how do you know when there's a sequel in your series? And they went down the line, as panels always lamely do. My answer, right. And they were saying things like, when I can tell that the land is in danger, when I hear my characters crying out to me, these are the answers they get. Got to Larry at the end, and he said, when my editor calls me and says, I've got $20,000 for a sequel.
Oh, there you go.
I think for $20,000 we'd write a 4th book.
Yeah.
And then any final words for the audience?
No, I'm very pleased with the series. I liked it. It's I would never written alone, so great that Mike invited me to do this project, and been fun. It's gotten pretty good reception, and I look forward to finishing it in 1 or 2 or 5 books or whatever.
Yeah, basically the same thing. I think it's fun. I wouldn't have gone ahead and done it solo either. And I think it's an interesting take. And I think if nothing else, from the beginning, we have a very epic ending in store. So if book 3 goes the way I expect it to, there will be a lot of people with jaws on the floor. So
Yeah. And book 2 ends with them going to the Grand Canyon. Or does it?
I guess it depends on what Mike
Depends on
decides.
how we're feeling. We go to write book 3. It turns out.
He might decide I don't want to be in the Grand Canyon. I want to be in Lemuria. Like,
What if it's Mars? It looks like the Grand Canyon.
Could be. You never know.
Mars,
Yeah.
a million years ago, got an atmosphere, drying up. 12-foot tall Anunnaki are chasing them across the plains.
Where do the ancient Egyptian gods come from? Aha. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
this could be the
It could
DNM
happen.
pyramid, right? You never
Yeah.
know.
You never know.
All right. Well, so folks should definitely check out Ice Trials. It's out now, right? I think you
Yes.
can.
Yes,
Yeah,
in
you should-
hardback and ebook, DRM free, wherever ebooks are sold.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure, and everybody should go out and buy a copy of Ice Trials immediately.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you again.
And now, as promised, part 81 of Wen Spencer's Tinker. Inventor and girl genius Tinker lives in a near-future Pittsburgh which now exists mostly in the land of the elves. She runs her salvage business, pays her taxes, and tries to keep the local ambient level of magic down with gadgets of her own design. When a pack of wargs chase an elven noble into her scrapyard, life as she knows it takes a serious detour.
As the first bullet struck the lion, its appearance transformed to the deep violet spell form, a polygon rendering of a lion done in magic. The runes flared with each rapid hit, flashing like a strobe light, the small dog writhing inside the monster puppet. The spell form slowed the bullets until she could actually see them flying through the magic like a swarm of angry bees. The first bullets missed the important dog core, but they acted like tracers for her aim, even with the kicking gun. The construct was smashed backward, and at least 3 bullets struck home. Once dead, she expected the lion to revert back down to lapdog, but the massive body remained, showing no sign of what killed it. 3 seconds. Her gun was empty, her ears were ringing, and the beast was dead. Then the second Fu lion hit her from behind, bowling her over. Its massive jaws closed on her shoulder and she was jerked upward, off her feet. She screamed in surprise and fear. With her dangling in its mouth, the lion bounded back toward the Oni compound. Shit, it was fetching her like some rubber play toy. "Pony!" she cried as she thrashed, trying to squirm free. The teeth didn't seem to be piercing her skin, but it had a firm hold on her. She clawed at its face, but it didn't seem to be feeling pain from her flailing at it. How was it seeing, she wondered, and clamped both hands over its eyes. The Fu lion stumbled to a stop and shook her hard. Its teeth sank into her shoulder, and she screamed in pain and sudden fear of being mauled. The construct's pause, though, had given Pony a chance to catch up. He slammed the Oni sword deep into the lion's side. The length of steel shifted the lion into spell form and revealed the dog within. The blade struck not where the real heart of a lion would lie, but farther back, to unerringly pierce the dog. The lion roared with pain, dropping her, and then collapsed. "Domi, are you hurt?" Pony crouched beside her as she crabbed backward away from the unmoving lion. "No." With him between her and the beast, she felt safe enough to stop crawling and actually consider if she was hurt. "At least not badly. But I'm getting tired of hearing that question." "Forgiveness," Pony murmured, and lifted up her shirt to examine the puncture wounds. "Pony," she whined. "Sometimes one is wounded more than one knows." Pony eyed the puncture wounds, then glanced about, as if looking for a light source. "I cannot tell how deep they are. We need to stop the bleeding. Come, there will be supplies in one of the tents." "I'm fine." She stood by herself to prove it. "I just want to get someplace safe, and I want my gun." She swayed as she looked down, trying to see the matte black Uzi on the ground, but the dark was making it impossible to see. "I'll look. You just walk to the tents." So she teetered off ahead of him as he went slowly, searching the ground that the Fu lion had covered while carrying her. It was a surprising amount. If she'd been feeling up to a faster pace, she would have told him to forget the gun. As she reached the tents, delayed reaction was setting in, and she came to a complete, trembling halt. Why couldn't she get her breath? Was her lung collapsing? Oh no, that's right. She'd just run like 3 miles. Oh gods, oh gods. She desperately wanted Winwolf, a hot shower, and a comfy bed with him in it. Here it is, Domi. Pony handed her the Uzi, considered her, took it back, searched her pockets for a fresh clip, reloaded the gun, put the safety back on, and slung its strap over her head, settling it on her back. I'll find a first aid kit. Sit down. She sat on a pile of massive foundation stones between 2 tents, panting and shaking, as he went off. Now that she was still, she could feel the feedback again. It seemed stronger. Okay, get a grip. 2 roads. Which one should we take? When built, the palace was going to have a great view of Pittsburgh. From where she sat, she could see out over the top of the surrounding elfin forest to the barren cut of the rim and the bright human city beyond it. Both roads, however, led downhill into dark unknown. The left road would be the more direct way, but in Pittsburgh, that usually meant a need for a bridge. She doubted that 3 weeks had been enough time for something as ambitious as a bridge to be built. But hey, she built a gate that folded dimensions during that period. Still, if said bridge was unfinished, they'd lose valuable time backtracking. On the leftmost road, a shadow moved against the blackness, perceivable only as motion. Tinker froze in sudden fear that it was another fool lion, and then realized it was humanoid. Friend or foe, human, elf, or oni. Tinker got the impression of tall, slender, and graceful, realized it was an elf, and had started forward to greet the elf, when she suddenly recognized the female. By then it was too late. Suddenly the tents and stones became sides of a trap. Sparrow was in black leather pants and a black shirt, only her white skin and long pale braid glinting in the moonlight. The elf pointed a pistol at Tinker, the barrel hole seeming massive. They must be complete twits not to be able to keep track of one little girl. Where is Stormhorse? The Oni sent foo lions after me. Tinker indicated the nearest dead lion and the dark forest beyond. She could feel the Uzi heavy on her back. Could she get it swung forward and the safety off before Sparrow shot her? She let all the weariness and heartache of the last 3 weeks bleed into her voice. He told me to run. How convenient. Tom wants you back. Make no mistake, you're too dangerous for me to let wander back to Windwolf. One false move, and I will kill you. You've already lost, Sparrow. I'm the pivot. I've made my choice. There's nothing anyone can do about it. You're still thinking like a human, Sparrow tisked. I've got the rest of time to figure out another way of doing this. The beauty of all this is that I only lose if you live to tell Windwolf what I've done. Guessing what was coming next, Tinker threw herself sideways, but still Sparrow's bullet smashed into her side, knocking her off her feet in a violent half-turn. Pony was suddenly there, catching Tinker before she fell against the stone. He shouted something, and Tinker felt magic surge up, rushing like hot floodwaters. The blueness of his magical shields flared around them. Sparrow's gun thundered again and again, the muzzle spitting flame and smoke. Tinker felt the bullets strike Pony's shields, expending energy into the system with a hard kick that transmitted through the spell and Pony's body to her, and then ricochet harmlessly away. When Sparrow hit the end of her clip, Pony drew his Oni sword, the steel blade disrupting his shields, and thrust the sword deep into Sparrow's chest. Die, you traitorous bitch, he growled, and shoved it on through her. Sparrow had cried out when the sword first penetrated her. She looked surprised at the blade buried in her own body, and then concerned as she tried to gasp for breath that wouldn't come. Sparrow slumped backwards against the tent wall, even as Pony yanked the sword back out of her chest, her eyes going unfocused. The canvas cradled Sparrow gently, bowing under her falling weight, so she slid elegantly downward, leaving a smear of blood on the white canvas. Tinker stared at the dead elf. She thought she'd be happy to see Sparrow dead, but she could feel no joy in the killing. Maybe she hadn't hated the female as much as she thought. "Tinker, Domi, where did she hit you?" "In the side?" Tinker realized she was holding her side. She lifted up her hand and found it covered with blood. Ah, shit. Pony sat her back on the stones, activated a light sphere, and examined the wound. "It is not bad. The bullet merely grazed you. I feared the worst. I thought she had killed you." "I'm still alive and kicking." "We must stop the bleeding. Then we must get out of here." He took his hands away, as if he expected her to topple without his support. When he saw she could actually sit by herself, he went to fetch the abandoned first aid kit. "Sparrow came up the left road," Tinker told him when he'd returned. "She probably left the rolls somewhere close by." Pony sprayed the wound with a cool antibiotic and then pressed 3 large artificial skin patches into place.
On the next episode of the Bane Free Radio Hour, Jeremy Comieux interviews Casey Azell, Justin Watson, and Tom Kratman on 1919 Romanov Rising, and more Tinker by Wen Spencer. This has been the Bane Free Radio Hour. Thank you for listening. Score by Ruth Judkowitz.